Chapter 1. The Trinity of Parts. Divine Creation. It has long been postulated that there are undeniable patterns found in the natural world. These patterns should not be present if left only to the biological forces recognized by modern science. The forces of random mutational change and blind chance. In previous books, I have referred to these patterns as being the fingerprint of the divine, proof of God, if you will. And even though there are theories that argue otherwise and push the illogical notion that the whole of creation is ordered into form from chaos through random means, I feel this over-intellectualization can cause more problems than it solves. For example, if all things came into existence through the random engine of biological evolution alone, if this was truly the case, then there would be no need for beauty and no means in which to appreciate such subtleties. And if the strongest and more aggressive survive at the expense of the frailer, then why are there such delicate organisms all over the planet, and how come we are not all complete barbarians? Let's face it, there's no need for a moral code in such a world as this, and yet there seems to be an inescapable rule book written into the soul of humanity. Such rules come from the higher ideal of spirit and tell us when we are at fault. Such rules grant us a conscience and urge us to reach out to our fellow man with compassion and love, rather than following primitive, violent and selfish impulses. I will not continue with this course of reasoning due to covering these subjects in previous publications. It is my intention for this book to be focused around those individuals that have stopped searching and found. There is a point where this kind of argument ceases to be important and spiritual awakening begins. From this point forward, I will cease trying to convince the reader of the existence of an all-seeing, all-powerful, supernatural creator, and assume the reader has already entered into a union with the divine, a union that has changed or is beginning to change their life and their perception of reality. Transitions such as these can take a long time to unfold, and they can be uncomfortable on a physical as well as on a mental and spiritual level. What I mean to say is, through fear and disobedience on our part, we can make the transition into a full spiritual body more difficult than it needs to be. In this chapter, we will be looking at the fundamental parts of major energetic systems. There are patterns that can be found from one system to another that speak of the one creator and the ways of the divine. Once recognized, we can begin to relax into natural transformation rather than fighting it. In other words, we can begin to trust the internal spiritual change that occurs whilst walking the path. There is a point on the spiritual path where there is simply no turning back. This point of no return occurs quite quickly. Once we have tasted spiritual life, there is nothing that comes close to it, and so nothing else lives up to the experience. I have heard others speak of this need to continue regardless of difficulty as being like dating Superman or Wonder Woman. Imagine going on a date or two with a superhero. Imagine what wonders you would see and what you would experience, flying through the clouds and having the sense of being wonderfully free and completely protected by superpowers. Then imagine losing this union and trying to find someone else who lives up to the experience. Every single person would fall short, for once you have experienced the best, everyone else becomes dull and lifeless and unimportant in comparison. This is what it's like to take a step into the pool of everlasting life. It's wonderful, and nothing else will do. That's not to say we are the person who is worthy of such gifts, or have the wisdom to carry such a torch. This is why we find ourselves changing inside, deep inside our souls, in order to accommodate our new direction and walk the golden path laid before us by divine hands. We may find ourselves trying to run away from this change through a lack of understanding, and through the process feeling strange and alien. The divine does not abandon us because of our transgressions, and when we stop running and turn around, we find the divine directly behind us, making sure we come to no harm and we are welcomed back with open arms. We are human. We make mistakes. We get frightened. We lack wisdom. We get it wrong. But through the change, we become much more than we could ever have been before the time we dipped our toes in the divine waters. A little understanding of divine creation is extremely helpful, and so with this in mind, I will try to explain as clearly as I can how the Trinity of parts goes to lay down the foundation for all things great and small, and this includes you and me. The Trinity of parts is really an understanding of energy in the natural world and how energy arranges itself in accordance with God's will. These laws of energy hold true throughout the cosmos. Let us now look at the first part, the part of Earth. Part 1, Earth, the physical and that which man can naturally reach in a physical sense. The part of Earth constitutes the land and all material below the land, but also the physicality of the flesh and all manifestations of physical life upon the land. This includes you and me, and all things that walk upon the earth that are mortal, and all things that fly, and all things that swim in the sea. Earth pertains to the grounded energies that go to make up mortal realm, and this includes all the plant life and vegetation too. Earth encompasses all the physical energies that are born into the world, grow, mature, wither, and eventually die, but also all solidity of matter, the ground beneath our feet, and all other things born of atomic structure such as clouds, rain, our atmosphere. All of this is mortal realm. All of the elements, that is, the physical properties of the elements, are all within the part of Earth. For example, air, fire, water, earth are all parts of Earth. A simple way of understanding those things within the part of Earth is to think of Earth as anything and everything that is within man's reach that he can physically touch. Even though man cannot touch the clouds directly from the surface of the planet, it is not outside the realms of possibility. For example, if a person were to climb a high mountain, then they would have the opportunity to physically feel or touch the clouds. Second understanding of Earth: protection, meaning, and purpose. Each part, and we will look at the other parts shortly, has its second understanding or spiritual counterpart or state. With respect to the part of Earth, the second understanding is the grounding forces of protection and grounding energies in general. This grounding is important, for it gives life on Earth a sense of place and harmony and balance whilst reaching for the higher places. The grounding forces of Earth are responsible for the transference of the high energies of spirit into the physical. Our sense of place, which comes from the grounding properties of Earth, allows us to do things of worth and importance in the world in accordance with divine plan and divine will. Without the grounding forces of Earth, we would have no earthly tether, and we would cease to exist in this realm or even in the physical dimension. Earth is the lowest point of divine creation, but it is extremely important we fulfill our purpose on this level. We have been put here for a reason, and the grounding forces of earth allow us to carry out our purpose and find our place in the world. This does not mean finding our place in the world of man, but instead it means finding our place in the world of God, in order to carry out divine will. With respect to divine creation and man's place in it, the grounding forces allow for the practicalities of life. This includes the need and drive to survive and protect the physical body from harm. Okay, so that briefly covers the part of Earth and outlines the second understanding of Earth that has to do with the spiritual counterpart. So let us now move on to the second part in divine creation, the part of the heavens or the celestial. Part 2. The heavens, the celestial. Those physical things that are not within man's natural reach. This part includes the stars in the night sky that are contained within our Milky Way galaxy, the myriads of galaxies full of stars and full of wonders, and all those things way beyond man's natural reach. The part of the celestial also includes the sun and the moon and the planets that share our solar system. The celestial encompasses everything in our solar system and also everything beyond. These things cannot be reached outwardly in physicality, in a natural sense. Instead, these places can only be reached inwardly in a spiritual sense, through a feeling connection with all things, and these things are appreciated within the heart of man. This real sense of the celestial can be felt by all living things and can be called the light, or the light of all things. If there are parts of humanity that cannot feel those things outside of man's natural reach, if man cannot feel the celestial, it is fair to assume that there has occurred a disconnection or a severing of connection from the universal divine spirit. This connection can be fixed, but first there is needed the smallest amount of faith on a personal level. Each person must make the connection themselves or come to the realization that something is missing in their lives, that there is something very wrong with the world that mankind has created for himself. Man cannot reach the divine through physical means, and yet these ill-conceived ventures dreamt up by mankind to touch the stars with machines such as rocket ships still dominate and enslave his drive for ultimate adventure. The only path, the only way to reach the wonderment of all things is as ancient as the stars themselves. To reach with the Spirit is to have faith in the all-permeating force of the one Almighty Spirit that is in all things. The reaching is done with faith and an open heart, and through this reaching all things become possible and all things are within reach. The distant stars and those things pertaining to the celestial become gifts that can be felt within. These gifts are the true ornaments of the soul. One could conclude that the outward unreachable places become reachable through inward means. Or put plainly, the blessed realms or heaven can be reached through the gateway of the heart. The physical sensation of the celestial can inspire man to make that all-important leap of faith into the higher dimensions and the blessed realms. We all feel this sensation when we gaze up into the night sky and are awestruck by the majesty and the beauty of the physical heavens. The stars shine their light down on us from thousands of light years away, and regardless of the huge distances the light has travelled, we feel it. We feel it deep within our souls, and this experience moves us. We are elevated towards a higher vibration. The trick is to stay within this higher vibration and not slip back towards the mundane sensation of life that can exist within the grounding and trapping forces of mortality. It is important to understand that this higher vibration, this feeling sense of the blessed realms, is the beginning of the journey to the higher planes of consciousness and the higher levels of spirit. The journey to heaven begins before our life on earth ends and before our physical body withers and dies. Indeed, it is the correct human condition to walk in more than one realm simultaneously, and it is unhealthy to be cut off from the blessed realms. Those that feel and know the higher places live longer than those who do not. This is a documented fact. An official study was done over 10 years ago which looked at longevity across the whole of human society. Those that believed in God and professed to feel a sense of the divine within lived approximately 15 to 20 years longer than those that did not feel the divine and did not believe in the divine. The numbers speak for themselves and speak the truth. The higher vibration that flows from the blessed realms will extend physical life on earth. The second understanding of the celestial, or the heavens, transcends the physical heavens, the sun, the moon, the stars. But like with all primary understanding, an appreciation of the lower vibration state, the physical, will lead to an appreciation of the higher vibration state, the spiritual. In this sense, the physical heavens, the awe-inspiring starry night or a beautiful sunset becomes the inspiration and the key for reaching the blessed realms, whilst still partaking in life on earth. The second understanding of the celestial, constant connection with the source, constant feeling sense of divine blessing. The second understanding of the celestial comes in the way of a constant feeling connection with the heavenly bodies, whether they are close to the earth, as with the sun, the moon and the planets, or whether they are cosmically distant, like the stars. The second understanding of this part has us right at the center of creation. There is a difference between looking up at the moon and feeling the cooling, healing sensation of its energy and sensing the placement of this celestial body regardless of time of day or night. When we feel on this enhanced level, the sun on the horizon at daybreak, or the moon as it rises and sinks and swells the oceans, when all of this cyclic sensation is constant in each moment-to-moment daily event, then we begin to live and experience the divine transformation that changes our lives and our souls forever. This newly healed connection that once was severed becomes a foundation for faith that begins the strong reconnection process with the divine source. Feeling the divine is not in itself transformation, but it is the beginning of transformation. The higher vibration counterpart facilitates an ethereal connection that is not physical but completely spiritual. The internal becomes the external, and the unreachable places become intimately known. Over time, and in a very mystical way, the corporeal and the incorporeal becomes one reality, and the heart is the bridge, in a very real, energetic and literal sense, that binds the outside and the inside together, creating completion and a sense of wholeness. The divine does not give us the fully transformed spiritual state on a plate, so to speak. Instead, the divine gives us opportunities to spiritually transform, and this takes effort on our part. The divine gives us the ladder, but we must make the effort to climb it. This second part of divine creation blends slowly into the third part, the understanding or the intellectual. Part 3. The understanding, the intellectual. This part has to do with man's understanding of the mysteries, or rather, the entering into and the acquiring of wisdom through being accepted into the mysteries. Entry into such orders does not come from mortals, but instead through entirely spiritual means. A person cannot force their way into a higher place of learning and thus gain higher wisdom through simply wanting it. Instead, those wise spirits that decide such things on the higher levels open a door directly in front of the would-be student and allow the student to accept or decline entry. The person entering into the mysteries will go through a series of tests in order to gauge suitability, but it is a foregone conclusion that the individual concerned will not be ready and will not be prepared for such tests. Very few are. There is an old saying with regards to those approaching the cliff of destiny that states, "Everyone falls the first time." But trying and failing should not be seen as an ultimate failure. In fact, one should never expect to never falter. Instead, one should harbour from the offset the increased desire for a hardened core that comes from trying, failing, and trying again. Internal spiritual hardness is essential for spiritual life, and this only comes from being pushed to one's perceived limits, falling, and then continuing regardless. If we learn from our falls, we ultimately learn about ourselves and become wise through the process. The great teachers throughout history became great through continuing on their chosen path regardless of difficulty and failure. Mother Teresa was famous for her do-it-anyway approach. She said, "If in trying to help those less fortunate than yourself, you are shown no gratitude and your plans fail time and time again, keep trying anyway." The preliminary tests constructed by the blessed realms are not so much tests to pass in the conventional sense, for they will be constructed to push the student over their limits. There is no pussyfooting around here. It's all to do with how the person copes that's important. Many people believe they are ready to undergo spiritual transformation when in reality they are not. Readiness usually occurs about 12 months after an individual has realized there is nothing left in the world, in the mortal world, for them to try, for them to partake in, for them to consume that might bring fulfillment. In other words, a person must realize there is no joy to be found in mortal realm alone. If a person clutching onto the idea that someone or something can fulfill them, then they are not ready. Readiness is defined by a turning away from mortal life in search of something that cannot at first be known as tangible or real, but instead known to the initiate as an intuitive feeling that cannot be explained. A longing for something far greater than themselves and far greater than mortal realm alone can provide. There is such a thing as false sensation of readiness. This is when a person is destined to be involved in the mysteries, but they are sensing their involvement ahead of time. This can cause great frustration, but the frustration alone, no matter how intense, will not unlock the door to a spiritual life. Some say that waiting and being frustrated is the very pressure behind the process that enables readiness to manifest. The spirit of destiny knows when readiness is present, and she will not move forward for anything less. Even though there is much variety of life that springs forth from Mother Earth, and life in all of its diversity has the ability to feel light, or put another way, divine love, much of life on planet Earth exists, lives, and reacts without needing to have an understanding of the energetic processes it is a part of. Man, however, is different in this respect in quite a profound way, for he has the capacity, through understanding his place in divine creation, to bridge the void between matter and the ethereal, This merging of intuition with intelligence is known as the mystic's bridge. It is this special knowledge that balances the flow of spiritual energy from the higher realms to the lower in the interest of bringing good into the world. There is great skill involved in which to balance the physical and the spiritual, mankind and the forces of nature, which includes the supernatural, for these two entities are really not separate, but all one of the same. The Druid orders do not use the term supernatural, they only use the term natural or of the natural order. This makes sense as, from the perspective of divine creation, it is all supernatural or all natural. Pick one term, but don't think of the supernatural and the natural as being separate. If we are thinking like this, then the separation is not really out there in the natural world, but instead inside ourselves. The second understanding of the intellectual, the deepening, the commitment to the divine. The spiritual counterpart of the intellect is the understanding in depth the mystical union between man and divine, mortal life and divine life. This is known as the deepening. This is when the divine comes through to meet mankind halfway and uncovers the secrets of life known only to the few. At this point, the individual will be told directly from the divine the plan for his, her life, what is expected and what must be achieved. This is the hand of God reaching down into creation in order to lift man out of the mundane grind of mortal life, the mundane prison man has set upon himself, and change the course of one's life forever. The second understanding of the intellect has a person looking into the face of God and knowing what God expects of them. This is big stuff. In fact, this is as big as it gets, and that's exactly why the early lessons are so tough. The beings of higher wisdom and guidance prepare the initiate ahead of time so that they do not fail right at the last moment. It is most important that at this monumental precipice of understanding there is enough momentum to carry the student forward with practical tools to facilitate positive change in the world in accordance with divine will. In the interest of understanding how these three parts exist, coexist and fit together, it is acceptable to view all three parts, the earth, the celestial and the understanding, as distinct and different from each other, but in divine creation there really is no separation between them. In truth, these three parts exist as a blend and as though in a constant harmonious dance with each other. Summary of this chapter. The part of earth. This encompasses physicality and all of the physical aspects and elements of planet Earth. The second understanding of Earth. This has to do with protection, grounded purpose and practicality. The part of the celestial. This encompasses the planets and the stars in the heavens, but also the sense of the bridge between this realm and those that are higher. Not the sensing of the higher realms, but instead the sensing of the bridge that joins this dimension to the higher ones. This is the beginning of divine sensation. The second understanding of the celestial. This encompasses the strong feeling sensation that emanates from all things along with a strong sensation of the divine, which flows through all things. This signifies that the student of spirit has crossed the aforementioned bridge between this realm and the higher blessed realms. This sensation is known as the blessing. It flows through the student and into the world around them, bringing healing to the student and to those around the student. The feeling sensation of the blessing is intimate and brings closeness to God. The part of the intellectual. This part encompasses an understanding and an appreciation of the divine through theorizing or experiencing the divine with the mind. The second understanding of the intellectual. This includes an understanding and an appreciation of the divine through direct sensation or experiencing the divine with the heart. Note: the second understanding, in all cases, is a deeper understanding of each part. The second understanding is of a higher vibration, which always includes and encompasses the lower vibration state. In this respect, the first understanding is always inferior to the second understanding. The first understanding is the mortal perspective, whereas the second understanding is the divine perspective.